Just wanted to introduce everyone at the outset and thank you guys for sending all the materials in. Thank you for the legal analysis. Those materials are very helpful, and we always like seeing them ahead of time. So with us on the call today are Val Stefanik. She's the director of FinHub. And we have a few people from our Division of Corporation Finance on the call. They're in our Office of Chief Counsel, and they've had a chance to go through the legal analysis, and we'll have some questions for you today. Those people are Jonathan Ingram, Michael Redick, and Mark Villardo. We also have representatives of our divisions of Trading and Markets and Investment Management. So Neil Matra is from our Division of Trading and Markets, and Jennifer McHugh is from our Division of Investment Management. And my name's Bernie Nolan. I'm an attorney in FinHub, so I work with Val. So with those introductions, I think I wanted to hand it off to you guys to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and maybe just give us a quick overview. As I said before, we've had a chance to look through the material, so most of us are pretty familiar with what's going on here. But if you want to give a quick overview, both in terms of the business and your legal analysis before we jump into questions, I think that would be great.
Okay, sure. I think our plan is to have the client just directly answer your questions, but essentially what I understand of the way Jengas is doing is no different than buying a ticket to access, let's say, a train station or entering a theater. Basically, the network has been developed completely at Jengas's efforts, and the solution that they're doing is essentially a digital version of licensing software. It's just that instead of collecting money, they are using the tokens, and the reason why they're using these tokens is that it enables the software license to be transferable downstream to other people. Whereas if you use money, the transaction is much more complicated. You would have to, each people downstream has to contact the original licensees to sub-license the software. So in the context, the big picture, we believe that the model of Jengas is no different than, let's say, buying a ticket to use that on a train, and then the person who bought the ticket could in turn sell that ticket to anybody else they want for whatever reasons. And so for these reasons, we believe that they're not securities. I'm been supportive of Gail directly contacting the SEC because I think that this is a very proactive step. And we'd certainly want to hear the comments and see if there's any significant issues we got to deal with. With that said, I will step aside and let the real star start. So Gail, the stage is yours. If you want to.
My name's Gail Jenkins. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
So the idea behind the blockchain is that we're going to take licensing and turn it into a decentralized service where content creators can license their software or whatever digital asset they want to license using the blockchain, sell the licenses through the decentralized marketplace function of the blockchain, and then the Jengas coin cryptocurrency is the underlying payment method within that ecosystem. So we don't do any type of converting Jengas coin to U.S. dollars or any other currency. It's just kind of a self-contained unit. Ideally, we will eventually be listed on exchanges, but that would just kind of be like an on-ramp, off-ramp for, maybe miners who don't want to use the Jengas coin minting system would be able to sell their cryptocurrency, and then creators who don't want to mine would be able to buy it and then be able to access the system. But the Jengas coin itself is just kind of the underlying method that royalties are paid out in, licenses are bought and sold for, that type of thing. One thing I wanted to point out is in the materials that we submitted to the SEC, we had initially planned on a pre-mine. We've since decided not to do that type of pre-mine. We don't have any investors. We've just built this project ourselves. And what we plan to do is just take a portion of network fees over time as the network is running as developer compensation instead of a pre-mine at the beginning. So there might be a small pre-mine just so that we can give some of the tokens away to creators that want to test and try the network, but not for compensation purposes, and not a significant one at all, not like what we had originally planned.
And so you would be compensated through royalty payments, for example. You would take a cut of that. Would you also be operating nodes that validate transactions and being paid in Jengas coin that way? How would you be compensated? Like, what's the different streams?
So it would be the network fees. So, for instance, right now the network charges 10 Jengas to mint an asset. Those 10 Jengas are currently burned the way the network is set up. But we were thinking that maybe we would take a portion of that fee that would previously just be burned and send it to a development wallet. Or, you know, there's transaction fees when you send the cryptocurrency. Depending on the amount of cryptocurrency that you're sending to another wallet, there is a fee there. Typically, those fees are paid back in the form of block rewards, and with the block reward to miners. The idea, instead of taking a pre-mine, would be possibly to take a small percentage of that. We don't want it to be a large amount or a large percentage of fees or anything like that, but just something, instead of, it makes the network more secure, in my opinion, if we don't have a huge pre-mine at the beginning where everyone using the network can see, like, can say, oh, look, they have this wallet with a huge amount of Jengas coin in it, kind of destabilizes the whole network. We don't want to do that. So in this case, we would only be compensated if the network is actually useful, because if it's not useful, nobody's going to use it. There's not going to be any fees. We're not going to end up with anything. So it only really works, you know, to compensate us for the time and effort that we put into developing this and the ongoing development that we will have to do if the network is useful to people. And that's what we really want. We do think that this is something that's needed, that there's a lack of real-world utility in a lot of blockchain projects. That's what we're aiming at directly. We are aiming to be a real-world utility for blockchain. And that's the primary goal of this project. The other main thing that I made notes and I skipped the first one. Originally, we planned on having a market cap. I think it's more conducive to the idea that we're not creating a vehicle for speculative investing by taking out that cap, so there is not a supply cap either. So, you know, we are not looking at this as an investment. We don't want anyone else to look at it as an investment. The asset tokens that are sold on the marketplace will never be worth more than the underlying software or digital asset that the license represents. There's no part of this that should be considered an investment.
Hi, I'm Joshua White. I work for Jengas Coin. I just wanted to jump in here and point out, I did hear her mention recently she's implemented a function on the blockchain that to create the rewards for people is based on the utility of the chain. So going along with what she was just saying, if no assets are created, if nobody uses the blockchain, we don't get anything, this current way to set up.
And block reward, in that low utility use case, the block rewards are also minimal. The block rewards increase based on network utility, and utility is a metric based on the marketplace license economy of the chain, whether or not it's being used for the purpose that we designed it for.
As measured in marketplace orders on the chain.
How would people access the marketplace? So would you guys be maintaining some kind of graphical user interface just to facilitate use of the product?
So each node, we're going to release the whole project open source. Each node has a built-in API that can be accessed locally, or they can choose to make their API public so remote users could access the API on that node. All of the transactions can take place via API calls. Now, we will be releasing a graphical user wallet, but it is just an example and anybody can build anything that they want to interact with the APIs of the node. Everything happens, node to node in a decentralized way as accessed by a node's API.
And I don't know whether you answered my earlier question, but you guys then will be operating one or a few of those nodes. Like, that's what you're anticipating, right? Like, how would that work?
We definitely plan on operating some nodes. We plan on continuing development of the network through time. But it's not centralized, it's decentralized, and anyone will be able to also operate one or many nodes.
And your submission said you would be overseeing future development and governance of the project. Could you flesh that out? How would governance work moving forward? You keep saying it's going to be decentralized, but
well, it is decentralized, but we plan to make the GitHub public, allow people to contribute to the open source project, and then nodes that want to stay on the primary network and don't want to fork off into their own network would need to make node updates when updates are released through the GitHub.
Yeah. Not to simplify, but yeah.
It's just that, it's similar in the way that other cryptocurrencies are open source projects that stay on their primary chain. You do see forks happen on occasion, and that's when some nodes branch off and start their own chain. But all the nodes that wanted to stay on the primary chain would need to update when we update it. But we are releasing it open source and anticipate community involvement in those updates.
So how would a protocol update be adopted? Just depending on whether all majority of the nodes sort of just decide to update as well?
Yeah.
Is that all? Is there a voting process?
There is currently no voting process in place. Just distributed networks by nature are a bit of a voting process. If the majority of peers choose one thing, then that is the consensus. Currently, in the open source software world, the code is posted to GitHub. If people would like to submit changes, they are free to do so. It would be up to Gail or myself or a collective team effort, more than likely, to decide whether or not to accept these changes or reject them. But even once we do so, I should note, that's just our decision. All the other peers on the network are in no way forced to follow our change, and at which point they can go fork off and do their own thing.
So when you're launching, are you going to be launching your own blockchain? Or are you going to be launching an application on top of another public blockchain?
It's a new blockchain. It's completely new.
Our own.
And so as folks want to become part of the network and want to become a node and participate and license their content, will there be any mechanism for, kind of AML, CFT, sanctions compliance for participants?
So to my understanding of that particular question, the AML would take place at the on-ramps and off-ramps between the Jengas cryptocurrency and the traditional currency. So it would take place on the exchanges. Everything that happens in the Jengas coin blockchain only takes place in the Jengas coin cryptocurrency. So there is no point in time where we accept another form of currency and convert it into the Jengas coin cryptocurrency. So I believe that the anti-money laundering and all the know your customer and all of that would need to take place on exchanges or wherever that transfer between Jengas coin and currency actually happens.
But there are going to be transactions happening on the Jenga closed network.
But they happen in a decentralized way. There's not a person or an entity in between those transactions.
And all of those transactions are denominated in Jengas coin, the coin itself. So there's no interaction between fiat and the blockchain.
But would you guys consider yourself an administrator of the crypto, of that coin?
No, once we launch it, we don't own it. I mean,
It's hard in these situations. It's a peer-to-peer network. There's many ways other people could just take it over. It would be hard for us to deem ourselves president or admin or anything like that of the project. We started it.
But once we launch it, we kind of give it away, and anybody can use it.
Right.
Launch their own, we kind of put it out into the world.
Right. And but how are those initial Jenga coins distributed to a user base such that they can start transacting?
Through the proof of work mining process, which is similar to Bitcoin's original concept and process, very similar in implementation, to where, yes, people would contribute hardware resources, electricity resources, in exchange to potentially get blocks and mining rewards, and that's where the coins come from.
But is there something in place, for example, how will people using the system know that they're not transacting with, for example, a sanctioned party?
Nothing is in place currently. That's why we were contacting all of you. Thank you for meeting with us, by the way. We don't know all of that, and we need to know all of that, it turns out.
I don't know in any blockchain there's a mechanism to.
Well, you got to take a look at the use case of this, right? This is for software licensing. I mean, what's the sanctioned party going to do with software licensing? If anything, they're going to avoid it.
Well, I really can't comment about that. I would recommend that you also talk to FinCEN just to cover your bases. That's not really our we do have concerns, obviously. Everything blends together, and we don't want to see projects, come into problems. We're just trying to flag issues for you. So, I would recommend that you do talk to FinCEN just about, how they would interpret what you're doing, given the guidance that's come out recently on that topic. But okay, no, I just had those.
Right. So one more question on that is that Jengas, I think they're going to be, if there's any exchange, it's going to go through. It's going to go through an exchange, which presumably does all the AML and KYC already for us, right? So I don't think that Jengas is directly dealing with users.
But that's not necessarily the case, right? So because there's three things rather. One is that Jengas can go wallet to wallet without going for exchange. So you don't actually need the exchange mechanism, even assuming that exchanges are sort of and then secondly, there is no exchange filter as such. You could be trading on the most compliant platform in the world, or you could be trading on some private platform out of some jurisdiction that doesn't follow anything. So I don't necessarily see that as being a filter. It just doesn't. I mean, so you don't actually need any of the platform mechanism at all. What it looks like.
Well, if you wanted to be able to convert the Jengas coin into some other form of cryptocurrency or some form of fiat currency, you would have to go through an exchange. So there is no, over-the-counter conversion. There's no. It's not like we're not an Ethereum token. We can't go through a DEX. The only way that a person would be able to convert the Jengas coin into any other form of cryptocurrency or currency in general would be through an exchange.
Well, what you're really saying that the rate for conversion would be available through a platform, because the exchange itself you could do through the wallet, right?
You could send Jengas coin from one wallet to another, but it's only useful within the marketplace system. So once you had it, if you receive royalties or payments for licenses, you would want to cash them out somehow, not just keep them in Jengas coin in a Jengas coin wallet, because you'd want to be able to spend that. So you'd have to convert it somehow. That's our understanding of it.
Would Jengas coin not be able to support any other token except one, sort of based on the Jenga network?
That is correct. It's not interoperable with any other cryptocurrency or token.
Yeah. Okay.
But and it's Mark Valero. But users can deploy smart contracts on the Jengas coin blockchain.
It's essentially, the license is essentially.
Yes. The software licenses are smart contracts, and those smart contracts can be traded on the marketplace, or sent to people through the wallet to wallet without the marketplace. We use them specifically for software licensing, but given that they're smart contracts, you can use them for other things. So I've actually created a demonstration game where they are items in this game.
Okay.
Just to show it to be done like that.
Okay. I don't know how others feel about this, and I don't want to monopolize too much time. It's already 11:23, but I've been through the materials a few times. I thought what would help me most is to understand what you would hope would happen on day 1 or day 8 or day 12 for you to launch this. It sounds like you have a type of user in mind. You have a vision as to how assets are going to be initially deployed on the blockchain so that the Jengas coin would begin its initial distribution. Can you give me an idea of what kind of persons or entities you would expect or want to utilize this blockchain? Yeah, I think you've already mentioned those who create software. Your submission seems to limit the media that would be the subject of licensing to be digital media. So maybe it's just whatever example you'd want to use, I think would help me understand how folks interface with the blockchain and what they hope to accomplish, who are creators, who are other users, consumers, publishers, node operators, and how does the Jengas coin flow through the system in connection with those relationships that are going to be established on the blockchain.
So I would say that on day 1, when we launch, the person that we would want to use the blockchain initially would be someone who licenses digital assets for use electronically, like, games, digital games, software, things for digital consumption, because the license can be verified digitally. When somebody purchases a license token for, say for instance, Adobe decides to license Photoshop on the blockchain. Then they would mint a bunch of Adobe Photoshop licenses. People would be able to buy those licenses and bring them into their Jengas coin wallet, and then the user would be able to authenticate their software, and Adobe would be able to see if they still have that token in their wallet or not by doing an API call to their own node. The good thing about the platform is that we open up the ability for licenses not only to be sold and verified through a signed message, but also resold. If a license issuer wants to allow future resale, they can. And if they choose to allow future resale, they can also put in their, basically in their smart contracts, the royalties that they would want to receive on any resale transaction. And then the marketplace enforces those royalty payouts on a resale transaction. So I do think that initially our ideal customers, people that we would want to use the chain, not customers to us directly, but customers to the blockchain itself, would be licensed issuers, companies that sell licensed products that want to be able to open their own revenue stream up to receiving resale royalties on future transactions. And I do think that that's something that is missing right now. It used to be that you could go buy, Nintendo game cartridges, you could play them, and then you could take them to, GameStop or wherever and sell them back for $10, and then, you get more money to buy more games. Well, the original publisher would never get any piece of that resale transaction. But in this system, they will. They can actually, the original license issuer can monetize the future resale transactions if they choose to allow that to occur. And then for consumers, they're then incentivized to use this form of licensing when they buy a product, because they will know that they can resell it later and get some of that back that they invested in the software in the first place. So there's a lot of possible use cases. I hope that I answered the question that you had, and if I didn't, please let me know and I'll try to elaborate.
Thank you. No, I think that having an example is a good starting point, and if that's a decent one, like the Adobe is more of an ancient technology, so I'm probably more comfortable with it than I am with online gaming. But if that's a useful example, right, a company that creates products that are available electronically, or that that are used electronically, would potentially utilize your blockchain to, I'll try to get the right verbs here.
License, like if
Track
they're
their, yeah.
if they're
So they
currently
would use, in effect, create licenses.
what was that?
Is your blockchain going to be used by the Adobes of the world to create licenses, or, and I don't mean to split legal hairs here, but are the assets deployed on your blockchain going to be the licenses themselves?
Yes.
Okay. So
They would mint an asset, like, just to break it down as quick as I can. Adobe would go onto the blockchain, mint an asset for Photoshop, and then tokenize that asset into however many licenses of Photoshop they wanted to be able to sell. So if they wanted to make 1,000 licenses of Photoshop, they'd come in, mint their asset, and then create 1,000 tokens within that asset. Those would each represent one license to Photoshop. Now, the software, they could distribute the software however they want. But the software would authenticate the license by being able to receive a signed message from a wallet containing a license to prove that that person who's trying to use Photoshop actually currently owns a license to it in their wallet.
That part can be done if the blockchain's down. That part actually just relies on some really complex math.
okay.
If the blockchain's down, you can still verify that the license is valid.
So in essence, your blockchain would become Adobe's, in this case, Photoshop licensing ledger.
Yeah, it's just decentralized. Like right now, these companies have these big, servers where they all do their own internal license verification, and we're decentralizing that. So we want to take it and put it on, 100,000 computers all over the world. Now there's everybody's licensing server. It's now a decentralized process that exists on a blockchain.
So the Adobes of the world would market Photoshop the way it markets Photoshop, and folks would either knowingly or unknowingly be granted or purchase licenses through your blockchain.
Yeah, this would be transparent to the end user. They wouldn't know any of this was going on, even if it was
Right.
going on. Yeah.
And okay, so then that's accomplished through Adobe minting these licenses on your blockchain as, I'll call them the license asset, which is different than the Jengas coin, right? I mean, the Jengas coin is the means through which the value that's created through the licenses is transferred.
Yeah.
All right.
And so, Adobe would receive payment for their licenses in the form of Jengas coin.
Right, so it would be the Adobes of the world who would, they would need Jengas coin to deploy these assets in the first place, and then they would be receiving Jengas coin in return for the purchase of the licenses.
Correct.
So they're going to be buyers and sellers of Jengas coin.
Well, the other thing that I want to point out is that resale transactions take place through the decentralized marketplace function of the blockchain, but original license creators like Adobe would be free to, they could send their licenses wallet to wallet without going through the marketplace system. So if Adobe wanted to collect $70 or whatever by a credit card payment in exchange for one of their licenses, and then they would send the license to the buyer, that's up to them. They can sell the license however they want as the original creator of the license. The resale transactions have a little bit different restrictions in order to protect, the royalties and the on-chain protocols that the creator made in the first place. To enforce those, resale transactions do primarily have to go through the marketplace function. But the original sale, they could just send it to a wallet. They could take cash for it and send it to a wallet. They could sell it however they want as the creator.
So, do others have questions about that? I think what's fair to call the original sale by creator.
And off-chain, if they sold the original licenses off-chain, obviously the blockchain had no party in that transaction whatsoever. The blockchain just facilitates the transfer of the license from the creator's wallet to the recipient's wallet.
Got it. Because my next question is something you already introduced, and that's the flexibility accorded, we'll call it the creators, to permit further transfers of the license on the blockchain to another party, and potentially for, in this case, Adobe to receive some sort of payment structured into the smart contract or whatever that would allow Adobe additional, and I think it's fair to call this a royalty payment. I mean, or unless it's just a license transfer fee, or maybe they're the same thing. I don't know. To help Adobe get paid for that subsequent transfer, or a piece of that subsequent transfer, and thereby capture additional revenue that it wouldn't otherwise have if the license were in fact freely transferable by the owner or licensee at this time.
So the way that we call it royalties, but the way that it works, when Adobe made their assets, they could say, yes, we want this asset to be resellable. It can be resellable after, January 1st, 2023, because they can put in an exclusivity date that protects their ability to be the only seller until after a certain date. And then after that date, when the asset's available to be resold user to user or through the marketplace, they would also be able to put in a royalty. So Adobe could say, hey, on every resale transaction, I want to get 25% royalty of that transaction. So then when that's sold on the marketplace after the exclusivity period ends, then the blockchain reads the royalties that are embedded in that particular asset and distributes the proceeds of the resale transaction according to that.
Could Adobe build in I'll call it a transfer royalty payment to the transferor? In other words, Adobe licensed it to a party. That party, after the exclusivity period, decides it doesn't need it anymore and would resell it. But that reseller would also want to capture a piece of that along with Adobe.
Oh, they get the rest of the payment minus the royalties. So, for instance, if I had a license for Photoshop that I could resell, and Photoshop had a 25% royalty built into it, and I sold it on the marketplace for 40 Jengas, I would get 30, and then Adobe would get 10. The blockchain, in a decentralized way that's not affected by any person or outside entity, would just take the contents of that, basically the smart contract, and enforce them at the point in time that the transfer is made.
But no, there's no way for the second party to add on additional royalties that they get upon resale. No, you can't do that. Only the original asset license creator can set up royalties.
And they can have multiple royalties. Like they could set up more than one royalty recipient when they create that asset in the first place. But the second party seller doesn't have any ability to alter that, like he said.
Would this kind of platform be usable by the ticket masters or Live Nations of the world when it comes to distributing licenses in the form of tickets to events?
Yes, in many other ways as well.
Okay. Is that right? Those are something that, unlike software, traditionally have physical presence in the world, but are more recently becoming more and more just digitized licenses versus physical tickets that you win. So that sounds to me like another type of license that would be potentially utilize this. But the difference there, of course, being an asset, in this case a license to go to an event, that could increase in value over time, where I think it's unlikely for Photoshop to increase in value during the exclusivity period or afterward. But okay.
So just to touch on what you're suggesting about the ticket price and possibly increasing in value, there are some things that can be put into these assets. For like the resale is an option that the creator has. The creator can also optionally not allow resale.
Right.
And they're the only ones that can ever sell the asset, and the asset cannot be transferred from one wallet to another. It lives in the wallet that it gets in the first place. So in a event ticket situation, it may actually help the scalping problem by you wouldn't be able to resell the ticket. Once you buy it, it's in your wallet. It can't be transferred to another wallet after that.
Well, it seems like there'd be an economic incentive for the creator to permit transfers, if for only to get more money, on a commission based on the resale price. So if I sell it to somebody for $100, I bake right into the contract. If you sold it for 1 cent more than the $100 I sold it to you, I'm taking 20% of whatever you resold it for. That would encourage scalping.
Encourage?
But,
I would think the opposite.
Unless you have unless your business model is such that where you hold back all tickets until all bids are in. But I'm saying allowing for transferability when you can get paid sounds like it makes economic sense. Because it's a unique event as opposed to software which can be replicated for an unlimited amount. Unless, of course, I guess you're doing an online access where you can have unlimited amounts of humans attending it at any given time. And then this could also be done for even more unique assets, right? Like art or any sort of digitized asset.
Yes, I think you're very right on that. Like, for example, intellectual properties licensing even.
So I think that what you're referring to is kind of what's going on in the NFT, like the OpenSea and things like that, where people are tokenizing digital art and then selling it as an Ethereum smart contract. I think that could actually happen on any blockchain.
Yeah.
The difference, I guess, the main difference between what we're doing in OpenSea is that OpenSea is kind of a centralized website that serves these transactions. And there's been cases where OpenSea has stepped in and reversed these transactions. The difference between what they're doing and what we're doing is that our marketplace is decentralized. Nobody has control over it. The whole blockchain has control over it, especially once the blockchain is launched and anybody can launch a node. It's not centralized. Things will have a market price. We're marketing it towards software companies and places that traditionally use digital license authentication to move from their own centralized digital license authentication into a decentralized platform. But there's always going to be edge cases where people could theoretically use it for other purposes. It's not what it's primarily designed for or intended to do.
Can we unpack the secondary marketplaces a little bit here? I'm happy you referenced OpenSea, and we're pretty familiar with what's going on there. But you were saying that the marketplaces can be created and sustained by anyone, including you guys. any node operator, right? Like how does that work technically?
So it's one marketplace.
Okay, there's one marketplace. Okay.
The node, it's decentralized though. So just like the ledger is decentralized across all the nodes on the blockchain, so is the marketplace. So if we have 1,000 nodes and we're making transactions to one node, it gets broadcast to all the nodes. So it's actually, the whole thing is decentralized. Do you want to fill in that at all?
What's the question? Sorry.
Wait, but is that one marketplace, or does that just mean anyone can engage in a market transaction anyway?
Yep, it's just one marketplace. All the nodes are supposed to, in perfect situation, have an exact copy of what what every other node has. So they all have the exact same set of orders. For example, bid ask orders from the marketplace. Anyone who launches can become part of that network, but they're not their own marketplace at that point. They are just part of the decentralized.
I guess I'm just not understanding what mechanism is in place to facilitate that kind of marketplace. Is it baked into some kind of smart contract? Would you like to do an order book on chain? And if so, how does that work technically?
It's a protocol, a blockchain's a protocol, a set of rules on how things are governed. We just added the rules that allowed you to create specific transactions, marketplace order transactions, namely. There are two types, bid or ask. If you wanted to create an ask order, you would need to already own the asset you're creating the ask order for. Rules like this are in place on all markets. Rules in place like this are in place on the blockchain. If you want to create a bid order, you would have to have enough Jengas coins to cover the amount that you're offering to pay for this asset you're trying to buy. It works very much like a centralized marketplace, only decentralized.
All the open bid and ask orders are shared within the
They
entire network.
themselves are transactions on a cryptocurrency most cryptocurrency networks work, each individual transaction is broadcast to all nodes. All members and nodes know about those transactions. So no different on these marketplace transactions. The difference is the chain itself actually matches orders. So where there is no human or broker deciding that this person's bid matches this person's ask, the chain itself figures that out, completes the orders, and creates new transactions where it sends an asset where it's supposed to go, it sends profit where it's supposed to go, and it sends royalty payments where they're supposed to go.
No, I think I understand what you're saying. So when say someone posts a bid or an ask, that's a transaction in and of itself, which requires a fee, right? Okay. All right, yeah, no, I can stop the questioning with respect to the technicalities of that.
So I think that this is going to be interesting, though, from getting a market. So quite a few questions around that. So firstly, I'm still not sure about what you mean by one marketplace, multiple marketplaces, because it seems from your opinion, and maybe this is just semantics, but it sounds, I think that, everyone can access to expect transactions contained within the blockchain, an open source marketplace that can be launched by anyone who wishes to host a marketplace. And so it seems like you actually can have the potential to have multiple marketplaces. Is that right?
So I think what you're referring to is kind of back when the idea wasn't fully built out yet, and I had envisioned people being able to create web-based interfaces to access the marketplace. The marketplace being the centralized or the decentralized marketplace that exists on the blockchain itself. So because the blockchain is interacted with via an API, it is possible to build a web-based interface that interacts with the marketplace of the blockchain. And so that anybody who wants to can host their own marketplace is that's kind of the implementation that I meant by that. But the marketplace, the functionality that is the marketplace exists in a decentralized way on the chain itself. But people can build any number of off-chain applications, portals, websites, interfaces that can access the data of the blockchain via APIs.
Right. So what you're saying is there are multiple access points and multiple data views possible of the same Unity marketplace. There's one marketplace.
One marketplace, but every node has an API. So when, ideally, Adobe would be running their own local node, and they would be verifying licenses by making API calls to their own local node.
Okay. So now,
interface
okay. So now, to just understand this further, how does the transaction take place on the marketplace? And so, you have two mechanisms. You have a bid and an ask, right? So let's say I post a bid, or I don't know, I post a bid to sell 10 Jengas for $10 or something like that. And that gets matched. Who does the matching? Is that automatic matching by the blockchain?
Automatic matching by the blockchain, you can't create a marketplace order that says you want to trade 10 Jengas for $10. The marketplace only supports creating orders to buy or sell assets denominated in Jengas coin only, assets which exist on the blockchain. So
Right.
You couldn't interact with outside entities.
I understand. So it's denominated in Jengas coins. They're buying and selling assets or a certain number of Jengas coins. That's fine. There's a fee payable on the transaction.
Currently, yes, it's 1 Satoshi, which is 0.80 it's really just there to prevent spam. We didn't even want to take fees from those transactions, but without any fees, someone could spam and close the blockchain negatively.
But there's no, it doesn't work the same way as gas, right? So, I mean, I can't offer to pay 2 Satoshis and get to the top of the order book. So what are the protocols for the order book? Is it just price time?
It's just based on price and volume. Obviously, if there's an agreement between price between bid and ask, an agreement between the number of asset units you're selling, i.e. I want to buy one, you want to sell one, if all of these things match, orders are put together, and the assets move, the Jengas are moved, the royalties are paid.
That's helpful, but that's the match. So I'm asking about the protocols. Like, what gets to the top of the order? Is it based on time? Is it based on price? Is it based on volume? Or something else? How is the order book? What's the order book look like?
The order book, there is no top or bottom of the order book, so to say. There's just people who could potentially offer one and someone who's willing to sell for one. There's no top or bottom of the order book. If you offer to sell for one and I offer to buy for one and someone else offers to buy for one, who gets first? Whoever transaction is first.
So it's time. So it's a time-based protocol.
I believe so.
Okay. That's helpful. And then what happens in the case of a reversal? So I'm not sure how this would work in terms of the blockchain, but let's say there's some kind of error. Order didn't go through the way it should. How does it get reversed? Does it get reversed, or are we just stuck?
Currently, what comes to mind is in peer-to-peer cryptocurrency networks, there's a possibility for them to fork and become 2 different chains on the same network. When that occurs, one chain is going to be determine the winner. When that happens, the other chain, the losers, all those transactions would have to be reversed, including marketplace transactions. That's an example of when that could happen where these things get automatically reversed.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow that, because are you saying that every time an order doesn't get, every time there's an error in sort of processing an order, I have to sort of fork to get out of it?
No, I'm saying cryptocurrency networks normally have forks. When that happens, things have to be reversed, and marketplace will get reversed when that happens. An error in the order. If your order is accepted to the network, it is past error checks and is error-free. So order being a transaction you're sending into the network. If the blockchain accepts your transaction, it's there.
So what are those checks? Are those checks, is they essentially coded into a smart contract, or what?
According to the smart contract and just making sure, the basic checks to make sure if you're trying to sell an asset, that you own the asset. If you're trying to buy an asset, you have the number of Jengas you would need to buy the asset.
Right. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Is a portion of that very, very small fee going to you guys? Will it go to you guys? Will you be collecting on those trades?
On those specifics, I'm not sure which fees we would want to take a portion of. It's kind of a new evolution of the idea of, how do we get paid for building this project? And I really don't want to do a pre-mine. I think it's a better idea to, get paid over time if the network is successful. Because I don't want people to have a negative opinion of the network because there's a pre-mine.
We don't have any preference over, do we take fees from marketplace orders? Do we take fees from Jengas point trades? We don't have any preference over where those fees actually end up coming from. This was just a solution to how do we profit from all the work we put in.
And do you guys anticipate, I'm going to call it veto right, probably not the best phrase to use, but do you guys anticipate continuing to have that veto right? Like, let's say one of your community members proposes a code change, it goes up to vote, the majority wants it, and then I understand it, like I think you described it this way, that it would go to you guys for approval. And if you approve it, then the code change would be implemented. Is that how it will work interminably, or do you anticipate a change in the governance mechanism at any point in time?
For the Jengas coin, the chain that we're working on, I do anticipate that we would, as a group, collectively be able to decide what changes to add to the chain and which ones not to add to the chain. That being said, if somebody, if the community puts forth a change that they would like to see by submitting it to the GitHub, and a majority of the community wanted it, it would be to our benefit to accept that change, because if we chose not to, then the majority of the community could decide to adopt the change anyway and fork the network, and then nobody would be using our original network anymore. So that's just the nature of how a decentralized cryptocurrency works. So yes, we can decide what changes are going to be incorporated into the main code base on GitHub, but there's no incentive for us to not adopt a change that a majority of nodes would ask for.
There's disincentivized for us to do so.
Because none of the code is secret. We're releasing the entire thing publicly, and anybody can use it however they want. We want to keep everybody on the main chain, so we would want to adopt the changes that the community asks for. But the purpose of having that, the community aspect of that is so we can have testnet, devnet, we can try out these changes, we can see how they're going to work before we release an update and put it onto the live blockchain. So that's all kind of a mechanism in and of itself to keep the chain healthy.
Have you guys started distributing Jengas coin pursuant to like your Discord incentive program? I was reading about that.
Testnet coin.
Yes, but could it be used on the mainnet when it's launched? Okay.
Yeah, whenever we restart the chain, which even today we restarted the chain, all of that testnet coin goes out of existence. So we don't plan on any kind of like insider program or anything like
that. Well, I don't know whether anyone else has questions. I know we have a few minutes left here. So I'll give others another opportunity to ask their questions if they have any. Doesn't sound like anyone has any more questions.
So if not, then...
If we have a minute, I wanted to ask you about on-ramping creators. Is there any process that the blockchain would have for, I don't know, somehow validating the identity of a creator or someone who claims to be a creator of an asset?
No, we don't, but there's not really a need for that, because if, like, going back to the Photoshop example, I really like that example. Going back to that example, Adobe would only authenticate their own asset tokens that they created as being valid Photoshop license. So if somebody, a fraudster went on and minted a bunch of tokens that said, hey, these are Photoshop tokens, they wouldn't work with Photoshop. So I don't think that there's a need for us to be any kind of gatekeeper as to who can use the system, because it's for licensing, the software is going to know whether or not that's a license to it.
And because that escapes me, unless the asset itself somehow has a presence on the blockchain, I don't understand how you tie. How is it interoperable, or is there? I mean, in other words, yeah. I mean, you can eventually, I guess, find out, right, when if maybe I'm not thinking of the Adobes of the world who would simply take money and you wouldn't give Adobe the Jengas coin to take the license if the license weren't delivered by Adobe. So your interface with Adobe is not really going to be. It sounds to me like it would be in that instance more of a typical commercial transaction. I'm thinking about resales down the line. Of an asset that anybody could create, like art.
Well, I think that it would be a situation, not like any other marketplace where it's buyer beware. Adobe, if you're talking about resale transactions of the Adobe license, Adobe would be able to say, this is our license token. If you're buying one of these, it's a license for Photoshop. So you as a customer who wanted to buy this resale license of Photoshop would just need to make sure that you were buying, because they're not labeled like Photoshop or, like that. It's got a code, basically. It's the asset thing on the blockchain. So you'd be able to still go to Adobe and see which asset tokens are Photoshop licenses, and just make sure that's what you're about to buy. And if somebody was selling a piece, I don't really think that like real world art would be a use case for this coin, but let's say that it was, you would still have to be, buyer beware to make sure that that person who was selling you something, representing something else, actually had the thing that they were trying to sell you, and that thing that you were about to buy was that digital representation thereof. But I don't think that's a good use case for what we're building here.
If it were a piece of artwork, for example, and someone was trying to sell a forged or copy of that artwork, due to the nature of blockchain, it's all publicly available information. You could go to, say, some source of information to know the original address where this original artwork came from, and you can track where it went every point in time to every wallet it went to. In this way, you can verify if a given asset was related to the original artwork.
Right, that would be a separate endeavor that wouldn't be done on the Jengas coin blockchain.
It would be done by data mining the data on the Jengas coin blockchain.
Because the Jengas coin blockchain will contain data about the status of the asset and its history?
It currently does, yeah.
Okay, that's actually, maybe that's really what the question I'm asking is, so the asset is on-ramped onto your blockchain? When I mean the asset, I mean the underlying asset, not the smart contract that is the license. Or are they the same thing?
It's not attached in any way to the blockchain. An artwork could be linked to or attached in various ways.
Okay.
So I know we've gone over time here. I think this has been a great discussion, speaking on behalf of my colleagues. And I think we need to regroup on our end and have further discussion. Josh, I know I've been talking to you. I can reach out when appropriate, and we can take it from there.
Thank you all for,
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.